Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Okay, a few years back, Disney got into some trouble because employees in their IT departments were being told they needed to train their replacements who were coming in from India to take over their jobs. That didn't sit right with these people. There were about 250 of them. Coming from the Daily Mail, Disney forced 250 of its American IT workers to train up the Indian workers who replaced them. And from the New York Times, pink slips at Disney, but first training foreign replacements. It's a little bit difficult to imagine having a job at a company like Disney or one of the other major companies, because it's not only Disney, and then being told, okay, look, you're getting replaced by someone from overseas. We're going to pay them less. We're not going to give them the same benefits, and you need to train them. And if you don't train them, you're not going to get your severance pay. And it's not just Disney. Coming from Axios, U.S. companies are forcing workers to train their own foreign replacements. The Disney workers sued. There were 30 plaintiffs. It doesn't look like the lawsuits really went anywhere. From Ars Technica, ex-Disney IT workers sue after being asked to train their own H1B visa replacements. Ultimately, the Disney workers lost the lawsuit on a technicality. And Disney, at the time, was really hardcore cold about this. From the New York Times, judge says Disney didn't violate visa laws in layoffs. Here's how they got around the visa laws. A spokeswoman for Disney Parks and Resorts, Jackie Waller, said, quote, "As we've said all along, this lawsuit was completely baseless, and we're gratified by the decision." The former workers' cases hinged on their argument that the companies had violated clauses of the visa law requiring employers to show that hiring H-1B workers, quote, "will not adversely affect the working conditions of other workers in similar jobs," which they actually did do. They did violate that. But listen to this. The law also requires large outsourcing companies that employ many H-1B workers to certify in some circumstances that those workers, quote, "will not displace any similarly employed U.S. worker within 6 months of applying for the visa." Here's how they got away with this. The outsourcing companies argued that the law would apply to them only if the American workers who were displaced by visa holders that they hired had originally been their own employees, not Disney's employees. The judge was persuaded by that argument, although he did not entirely reject the idea that Americans were adversely affected by being fired. They were allowed to get away with it because the employees that were affected were Disney employees, and those employees were being replaced by a completely separate third company. One of the companies that the American IT employees sued was a company called HCL, based out of India. Apparently, HCL was ripping off some of these employees, at least according to the Economic Policy Institute. New evidence of widespread wage theft in the H-1B visa program. Corporate document reveals how tech firms ignore the law and systemically rob migrant workers. And that goes back to 2021. So take the American Disney employees, force those employees to train their replacements, in this case coming from India, who are here on an H-1B visa program, who, if Disney wants to lay off at any time, they can just lay off. And if Disney lays them off, they don't have much of a way to dispute that because they need to get out of the country within 14 days, at least according to the law at the time. I'm not an H-1 visa law expert, so please don't take this as legal advice. I'm just kind of giving you an overview of the story, which over the course of 6 or so years of this is really interesting. And having looked at what the actual tasks were, and we'll go through some of the tasks and break down what the story was of these American employees, it doesn't look like any of the people that were brought in were doing brain surgery or really complicated IT tasks. These were tasks that anyone could continue to do once they knew how to do their work. It looks as if Disney just preferred to have less expensive employees that they could fire at will. From the New York Times, pink slips at Disney, but first training foreign replacements. The employees who kept the data systems humming and the vast Walt Disney fiefdom did not expect trouble when they were suddenly summoned to meetings with their boss. While families rode the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and searched for Nemo on clam-mobiles in the theme parks, these workers monitored computers in industrial buildings nearby. making sure millions of Disney World ticket sales, store purchases, and hotel reservations went through without a hitch. Some employees were performing so well that they thought they'd been called in for bonuses. Instead, about 250 Disney employees were told in late October of 2015 that they would be laid off. Many of their jobs were transferred to immigrants on temporary visas for highly skilled technical workers who were brought in by an outsourcing firm based in India. One of those firms was HCL, which is being accused of robbing the H1B visa people that they brought in to replace these American employees with. Over the next 3 months, some Disney employees were required to train their replacements to do the jobs they had lost. Quote, I just couldn't believe they could fly people in to sit at our desks and take over our jobs exactly, said one former worker, an American in his 40s who remains unemployed since his last day at Disney on January 30th. It was so humiliating to train somebody else to take over your job. I still can't grasp it. Disney executives said that the layoffs were part of a reorganization and that the company opened more positions than it eliminated. But they didn't offer those positions to the people that they laid off to get replaced by people from another country. The layoffs at Disney and at other companies, including Southern California Edison Power Utility, are raising new questions about how businesses and outsourcing companies are using the temporary visas known as H1B to replace immigrants in technology jobs in the United States. These visas are at the center of a fierce debate in Congress over whether they complement American workers or displace them. For the people that sued Disney because they were laid off over these replacements, I don't think they feel too complimented. And we don't mean that kind of compliment. They're saying if you bring these workers in, it frees you up to do other kinds of work. And that's nice, but not for the people that lose their jobs. According to federal guidelines, the visas are intended for foreigners with advanced science or computer skills to fill discrete, specific positions when American workers with those skills cannot be found. Their use, the guidelines say, should not adversely affect the wages and working conditions of Americans. Because of legal loopholes, however, in practice, companies do not have to recruit American workers first or guarantee that Americans will not be displaced. Too often, critics say, the visas are being used to bring in immigrants to do the work of Americans for less money, with laid-off American workers having to train their replacements. Quote, the program has created a highly lucrative business model of bringing in cheaper H-1B workers to substitute for Americans, according to Ronald Hira, a professor of public policy at Howard University who studies visa programs and has testified before Congress about H-1B visas. A limited number of the visas, 85,000, are granted each year, and they're in high demand. Technology giants like Microsoft, Facebook, and Google repeatedly press for increases in the annual quotas, saying there are not enough Americans with the skills they need. I've been looking at some different job sites and looking at some comments that people have been making on this story and related stories. And a lot of the people that say they've worked with people on H-1B visas say that those workers are not really super experts. A lot of them come in really not prepared to work. A lot of work needs to be done to follow up on their work. I'm not saying that people on an H-1B visa, by definition, are not going to be qualified, but it does seem a little bit strange, and you could be a little bit skeptical that these are supposed to be some kinds of experts to fill positions that Americans can't fulfill, particularly when Disney is just straight up replacing these people and telling the people who already had those jobs that they need to train them to replace those Americans directly. You can't get more specific than that. You can't get more on the nose than that. You shouldn't be bringing people in to replace existing people. That at least violates the spirit of the regulations and the spirit of the law. Many American companies use H-1B visas to bring in small numbers of foreigners for openings demanding specialized skills, according to official reports. But for years, most top recipients of the visas have been outsourcing or consulting firms based in India or their American subsidiaries, which import workers for large contracts to take over entire in-house technology units and to cut costs. The immigrants are employees of the outsourcing companies. And if I was going to fix this process, the first thing I would do is say, no, companies need to have their own expensive departments to bring people in on an individual basis under these H-1B visas if the process is going to continue, and it looks like it is going to continue. To have this outsourcing company in the middle leaves a lot of room for inappropriate things, corruption, and makes it a little bit too easy for companies to say, okay, I don't know, give me 100 people, give me 1,000 people, whatever. Let the companies have to go to the work to hire people on an individualized basis, and let the companies be responsible to not replace people and go through a loophole the way Disney did in this situation. In 2013, outsourcing firms, including Infosys, Tata Consultancy Services, and HCL America, the company hired by Disney, were 6 of the top 10 companies granted H-1Bs, with each one receiving more than 1,000 visas. H-1B immigrants work for less money than American tech workers, according to Professor Hira, who said this in a hearing in March at the Senate Judiciary Committee because of weaknesses in wage regulations. The savings in pay have been 25% to 49% in recent cases. In a letter in April to top federal authorities in charge of immigration, a bipartisan group of senators called for an investigation of recent H-1B-driven layoffs, saying, quote, their frequency seems to have increased dramatically in the past year alone. Last year, Southern California Edison began 540 technology layoffs while hiring 2 Indian outsourcing firms for much of the work. 3 Americans who had lost jobs told Senate lawmakers that many of those being laid off had to teach immigrants to perform their functions. In a statement, the utility said the layoffs were, quote, a difficult business decision, part of a plan to focus on making significant strategic changes that can benefit our customers. It noted that some workers hired by the outsourcing firms were Americans. But how are you replacing regular W-2 employees with outsourcing firms? These are massive companies, the biggest companies out there. They're going to go ahead and take their W-2 employees and replace them with people on temporary contracts through some Indian outsourcing company. I mean, what kind of thing is this? You have to have some kind of responsibility to your W-2 employees. And that's something that should come directly from the Labor Department or at least the federal government someplace. Fossil, a fashion watchmaker, said it would lay off more than 100 technology employees in Texas this year, transferring the work to Infosys. The company is planning knowledge sharing between the laid-off employees and about 25 new Infosys workers, including immigrants, who will take the jobs in Dallas. Fossil is outsourcing tech services to be more current and nimble and reduce costs when possible, it said in a statement. So there's been no limitation on this that's actually impacted these companies. They should stop the outsourcing to companies. You can't outsource the H-1B visa process and not have this mess. That's what we're seeing here. Among 350 tech workers laid off in 2013 after a merger at Northeast Utilities, many had trained H-1B immigrants to do their jobs. Several of those workers reported confidently to lawmakers. They said that as part of their severance packages, they had to sign agreements not to criticize the company publicly. And that's a non-disparagement agreement, which is a more extensive agreement, let's say, than a non-disclosure agreement. It usually carries severe penalties if you speak badly in any way about the company. They're not illegal or anything, just think of them as an extreme non-disclosure agreement. Normally, a W-2 employee should not have to sign off on a non-disparagement agreement. That's asking a little bit too much. It's not like it's a trade secret if you feel offended for being laid off from a company. In Orlando, Disney executives said the reorganization resulting in the layoffs was meant to allow technology operations to focus on producing more innovations. They said that overall, the company had a net gain of 70 tech jobs. This is the same thing when they talk about the unemployment rate. Just because the unemployment rate goes down or something, regardless of whether or not that's even completely accurate, it doesn't mean that you get your job back. It doesn't mean, oh, we're hiring more people in this position. Okay, good for you. Hire more people in that position. It doesn't take care of the people. People are not numbers. People are actual human beings that do need to be respected. And even if your hiring rate goes up by 14% or whatever the number is, it doesn't mean that's spread equally or appropriately to the employees whose lives you've impacted. The tech workers laid off were a tiny fraction of Disney's cast members, as the entertainment conglomerate calls its theme park employees, who number 74,000 in the Orlando area alone. Employees who lost jobs were allowed a 3-month transition with resume coaching to help them seek other positions in the company. Of those laid off, 120 took new jobs at Disney, and about 40 retired or left the company before the end of the transition period, while about 90 did not find new jobs at Disney. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.